I get this question quite a bit. So tonight I thought, before I get to the tabernacle, why not answer it? Open your Bibles to John chapter 8. Starting with verse 1. John chapter 8, verse 1 reads, I'm in the Gospel of John. Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, talking about arrogant religious folk. Here Jesus is gathered around individuals that wanted to hear him teach. And here comes these interrupters. These self-righteous, better than anyone else, interrupters. And the scribes and Pharisees brought him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this one was taken in adultery, in the very act. Maybe this is my flesh speaking now, but I wonder how long they watched that act being carried out. Last Monday evening I taught on the pecker checkers. And by the way, for all the areas that it is being played on, a website, YouTube, so forth, it's the least viewed sermon that I've preached since I preached it in a very, very long time. Because I'm sure, especially the religious folk, saw the title of that message, Pecker Checkers, out of Galatians chapter 2, and immediately thought to themselves, oh no, I ain't listening to that. Just by the title alone. I'll just leave it at that. Just by the title alone. They didn't listen to the message. That's okay. I expected it anyway. The people that have been around for a while, I'm hoping that you're starting to see what we're up against. What we're up against. But it's no different what the apostles were up against. It's no different than what Jesus was up against. How many times we see both of those groups have to confront the religious establishment. It's just not one and done in the scriptures. You take Paul, for instance. How many times he had to confront the religious establishment? The person that wrote a good portion of the New Testament had to confront constantly the religious pretenders of his day. I am coming to believe and I'll preach a message on it soon enough, that the thorn in his flesh was the false preaching and the false accusations about his preaching that he couldn't shake. It seemed to follow him everywhere. Because the devil knew what he was preaching is the truth. The devil knew what he was preaching was the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he sent everyone and anyone to discredit that message, to mock it, to try to change it. Now, where was I? They said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Oh, that's right. I was wondering how long they watched that very act before they either interrupted it or waiting for the participants to be through. Either way, there's probably some peeping toms there. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down. This is Jesus' response to this. But Jesus stooped down. Just imagine this scene here, folks. They probably drugged this woman to this location where Jesus was, in front of everyone, and say, what are we going to do with this woman? They knew exactly what the law said, according to the law of Moses, what they should do. But they want to somehow back up Jesus in the corner and get him, because they've heard enough about his gospel. And they knew very well that in his gospel there's forgiveness of sin. Not, okay, let's stone her. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. They're trying to corner Jesus. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. What kind of response is that? Think about that. Here we have this tense moment being taken place 2,000 years ago. They think they have Jesus backed up in a corner in front of a crowd. And what does Jesus do? He stoops down and with his finger wrote on the ground. Now, as though he heard them not, is added by the translators. Just scratch that out. So Jesus stooped down to the ground with his finger, and he started writing on the ground. What did he write? And that's the question people always ask me. What did he write? So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And you'll see that verse used quite a bit. Now, do we know 100% for sure what exactly Jesus wrote down? Not necessarily. But we can place ourselves there about 2,000 years ago, put our biblical detective hats on, and explore these verses a little more and go a little deeper. Go to Jeremiah 17. Go to verse 13. O Lord, the hope of Israel. All that forsake thee shall be ashamed. All that forsake thee shall be ashamed. And they that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. Highlight. They that depart from me shall be written in the earth. How do you make the connection here then? I can't say with 100% certainty there is a connection. Why Jesus did what he did. But my guess, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what Jeremiah 17:13 had to say. So, when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. See? If that's all that would happen, I guarantee you, you would have had some of those people, those excusers, picking up some stones and started stoning her. But that's not where the story stops. It goes on, and again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. There he goes again, writing on the ground. Back to Jeremiah 17:13. And they that depart from me shall be written in the earth. And they which heard it, the accusers that is, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Now, back to verse 9 again. And they that which heard it, being convicted by their conscience. Circle that word conscience. You know what it means right here in the scriptures? To bear witness to one's conduct. To bear witness with one's conduct. How do they bore witness to their conduct? Obviously, by something that Jesus was writing in that dirt that day. Now, like I said, I can't tell you 100% if I'm accurate or not. But obviously it was a custom to do. I mean, we see it all the way back in Jeremiah 17. And they that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord. Here are these accusers. I'm not saying they're right or wrong as far as catching the woman in adultery. Obviously, she was caught. But what Jesus is pointing out, in my guesses, was what he was writing on that piece of dirt that day. Probably their names and the woman that they had acts of adultery with. Which caused them to bear witness to one's conduct, to their conduct. What am I saying? Jesus called them out. You're accusing this one of adultery. Well, why just accuse the woman? Where's the individual that participated with her? I know the culture was different back then. And it was much more easily to stone a woman in the act of adultery than deal with the individual male that was a part of it. But nevertheless, in Jesus' eyes, that is not what he saw. This was a two-party act. Well, at least two parties. Who knows? It could have been more. What he was doing, writing their names, my guess, I can't be 100% on it because no one really knows for sure. But he's writing their names, and probably along with their names, the names that they also had acts of adultery with. And that's why, one by one by one, they either dropped their stones or just eased out of that scene. Slip out of there as fast as they could. And they left Jesus and this lady alone. Because they were convicted. Because they bore witness to their own conduct that was written in the dirt. That's why Jesus says, he that is without sin. What sin? The sin they're accusing this woman of. I don't believe it's sin in general here. The sin that this woman was accused of among you, let him first cast a stone. They went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. They were all guilty. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I. I condemn thee. Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Go and don't be part of this adulterous sin anymore. Those accusers that caught this woman in the act was going to use the situation to try to corner Jesus and probably lay the grounds for Jesus to be stoned. And it backfired. Why? Because Jeremiah 17:13 says, There shall be ashamed. Thee, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all that forsake thee shall be ashamed. And that's exactly what they were. Ashamed. And they eased out of that scene as quick as they could. And they depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. The fountain of living waters that didn't condemn this woman, but said, Woman, don't be caught in this adultery sin any longer. Don't give place to the devil. Because the accusers will always be there to point out your sin. They won't be there to assist you in grace and forgiveness. They'll be there to stone you. Those without sin, cast the first stone. You got it? Now play a song. I want to hear from you.